Today we're going to start off with the next topic, which is oligopoly. We have already studied that there are four different types of market structures. On one extreme of the spectrum we have monopoly, and on the other extreme we have perfect competition. Now in between these two market structures we have two imperfectly competitive market structures, which are referred to as oligopoly and monopolistic competition. Now the way these two market structures have been positioned in this diagram implies that the features of oligopoly, they resemble more closely to monopoly, whereas monopolistic competition, it's more closer to perfect competition. If you're interested in finding out the characteristics of oligopoly, you would see that in this market structure, there are only few firms which dominate the market. Now, since the number of firms in this industry are fairly low, it's very easy for these few firms to cooperate with one another, and it is also likely that these firms can be involved in aggressive competition. Now, coming to the examples of oligopoly, one classic example of oligopoly which is given is that of Airbus and Boeing. Now, these two companies, they dominate in the manufacturing and sale of aircrafts. And if you look closely at the way these two companies operate, you would see that these two companies are involved in aggressive competition. Now, in contrast to this example, let's consider the example of our major oil exporting countries. Now, these oil exporting countries have actually formed a cartel. That is, they are actually operating as one organization. They are jointly making their pricing and output decision. So this is a classic example where firms in oligopoly are cooperating with one another. So it's quite obvious that the price and production decision is going to be different if the firms are involved in aggressive competition versus when they are cooperating with one another. Now, moving forward, let's first learn how we can identify monopolies. How can we tell whether a particular industry or a particular market falls under this market structure? Now, the way you can do that is by measuring the market concentration ratio. Now, what is this concentration ratio? It is the percentage of the market's total output supplied by its four largest firms. Now, here we have a small example. You can assume that in this particular market, there are 6 firms which dominate the market. Now, the first 4 firms are relatively bigger as compared to the last 2 firms, which are smaller in terms of their market shares. So if you calculate the total output which is being produced by in this market, just add the individual productions and that will give you 1100 units. The way you calculate concentration ratio 4 is that you're going to divide the market share of the first 4 or the 4 biggest players in the market, which incidentally turns out to be A, B, C, and D. So add their production levels, which comes up to 1000, divided by the total market production, which is 1100 times 100. That is going to give me 91%. So what that means is that the higher the concentration ratio, the less the competition. So here 91% implies that the 4 big firms in the market, they dominate 91% of the entire market share, leaving very little room for other firms to operate in this market. So this chapter is going to focus on oligopoly, a market structure which is defined by high concentration ratio. So an easy way of identifying oligopoly is that a market which will have a high concentration ratio will most probably fall under this market structure. Now, let's just move on to discuss how pricing and output decision is made in the case of oligopoly. Now we're going to consider a simple example here. Here we are talking about a water duopoly in a small town. Now, what is a duopoly? Duopoly is actually the simplest form of oligopoly. In duopoly, you have 2 firms operating in the market. Okay, so we are assuming that there are only two firms supplying water in this small town, and those two firms are firm A and firm B. We are further making the simplifying assumption that the fixed cost is zero, the marginal cost is also zero. So there's essentially no cost involved in drilling water. So marginal cost is zero, which in turn implies that the total cost is going to be zero. So this is some simplifying assumption that we have made, which we're going to relax in the next example. So here what you can see is, you can see the demand schedule for water for this small town. So you can see this is a downward sloping demand schedule. So as price of water increases, you can see that quantity demanded is going to decrease. So that satisfies the law of demand. Now in the third column we have generated the total revenue, and you can see that here total revenue will equal to is the total profit, because we just assumed that total cost is equal to a zero. So this makes our life easier, that the total revenue will coincide with total profit in this case. Now for for understanding purposes, I've also computed the marginal revenue in this last column. And you're already familiar that marginal revenue is simply the change in revenue brought about by unit change in quantity. So when quantity increases from 0 to 10, marginal revenue will equal 1100 minus 0 divided by 10 minus 0, which gives me 110. So using this logic, you can fill out all the entries in this column. All right. Now the question arises that if this was a perfectly competitive market, what would have been the perfectly competitive outcome in that case? So in order to answer this question, I have actually sketched the demand curve here, and we already know that if a firm faces a downward sloping demand curve, its marginal revenue is always going to be below it. Now, we learned earlier on that in the case of a perfectly competitive market, a firm operates where its market demand curve cuts the market supply curve. So what you see in front of you is that this demand curve, this is the market demand curve, okay? This is the market demand curve. We don't have a supply curve here, but we learned previously that marginal cost, or the MC curve, it can proxy as the supply curve. So in the question, we already know that MC is equal to a 0. So the MC is going to coincide with this horizontal axis. So if this was a perfectly competitive market, which obviously it's not, but we're just posing a hypothetical question that if this was a perfectly competitive market, what would have been the production level in this market and what would have been the price level in this market? So you can now answer this question that if this was a perfectly competitive market, the market production can be identified where the market demand curve, which is this downward sloping curve, cuts this market supply curve, which can be proxied by the MC curve. So you can see that this point of intersection occurs at this point where Q is 120 and price is equal to is 0. Hence, perfectly competitive outcome is going to be this. Let me just identify it on the table as well. So this is going to be the perfectly competitive market outcome where quantity is 120 and price is equal to a 0. Another way to look at this is as follows. Now, since this is a perfectly competitive market, we know that there's free entry and exit. You can see that as production increases, the profit is going to increase. Okay, so it's perfectly normal for a firm to increase its production all the way to 60. You can see that at 60 the profit is maximized, and that profit is equal to is $3,600. But a perfectly competitive market, this cannot be considered as the equilibrium of a perfectly competitive market, because we know that there is still, each firm is making, it must be earning some positive economic profit. So this is going to give incentives for new firms to enter, and the new firms will continue to enter until the profit is driven down to zero. And you can see that the firms will continue to enter until quantity is 120, price is zero, and each firm is earning zero economic profits. So that's the perfectly competitive outcome. Now let's work out that if this was a monopoly, what would have been the outcome in that case? We know that in the case of monopoly, a firm is going to operate where its MR cuts the MC, or in other words, a monopoly is going to operate where its profit is being maximized. So in this diagram, you can clearly see that the profit, or in this table, you can clearly see that the maximum profit that the firm can earn is 3,600. Okay, so the monopoly cannot do better than this. If it increases its production level, the profit decreases, and similarly if it's producing less than 60 units, its profit is going to be less than 3,600. So this is going to be the profit maximizing output level for our monopolist. The other way of identifying this point would be where the MR cuts the MC. So for your convenience, I've already drawn this diagram where you can see that MR cuts the MC at this point where Q is 60, and in order to read the price level, you have to extend this line all the way up to the demand curve, and you can see that the price is going to be 60. So the monopoly outcome is 60 and 60. Now I've just calculated these outcomes for comparison purposes, so you can actually see the difference between the oligopoly outcome and the outcomes of other market structure. So in summary, I'm saying that if this was a perfectly competitive market, 120 units of water was being produced, and the price would have been $0. If this was a monopoly, then 60 liters of water would have been produced, and the price of water would have been set at $60. Now, coming to oligopoly. Now, in reality, I said that this was an example of a duopoly. So this was, we assume that this is a oligopoly. So let's just see that if this is a duopoly, which it is, how would these two firms, A and B, set their pricing and production decisions? Now, I already explained to you that in the case of oligopoly, the pricing and production decisions are not made on the principle of profit maximization, right? So here, these two firms, their pricing and output decisions is actually made strategically. That is, firm A is going to make its pricing decision, or firm A is going to make its move keeping in mind the moves of firm B. Similarly, firm B is also going to think strategically, and it's going to decide on its pricing and output decision, keeping in mind how firm A is going to retaliate, or how firm A has already, how it already has set its own price and production decision. So it gets a little complicated when we discuss the pricing and production decision in case of oligopoly. And it gets, complicated more if you're talking about A and B, where they are aggressively competing with one another. So here we're going to consider two scenarios. So in the first scenario, we're going to talk about the cartel outcome. So what will be the pricing and output decision if A and B, they form a cartel? Now, let's first go into some definitions. Collusion is basically an agreement among firms in a market about quantities to produce or the price to charge. So that's an agreement between A and B, that we are going to, collude together. We're going to cooperate and make our pricing and output decision collectively. Cartel is a group of firms acting in unison. So if A and B form a cartel, they are actually operating like a monopoly. So the cartel outcome is going to coincide with the monopoly outcome. Okay, so I guess that's not very difficult to see. So a cartel is just like a monopoly. A and B, they have colluded together and they're acting as one. So they're acting like monopoly. So if you talk about what will be the cartel outcome, my answer would be that the cartel outcome would be the same as the monopoly outcome. Or in other words, if A and B form a cartel, they will be producing, or collectively, they will be producing 60 units of output. Or in other words, each firm will be producing 30 units of output. Here I'm assuming that the cost structure of the two firms are identical, and the market price is going to be 60, and the total profit that they would be earning is 3,600, which can then be divided between the two firms, which will be equal to is 1,800 each for both the firms. All right. So the more interesting outcome is the non-cooperative outcome. What if A and B are involved in aggressive competition? Now, in order to answer this question, I have constructed this table for your understanding. Let's consider the starting point, which is the duopoly outcome with collusion. Let's just go back to the table where you can verify that the firm cannot do better than this. 60, this is the cartel outcome. So if A and B, they collude together, this is the best outcome for them. It's the best strategy for them to both produce 30 units and enjoy a profit of $1,800 each. Okay, so that is my starting point, and that is what I've stated in this table, which you can see in front of you. So firm A is producing 30 units. The market price is going to be 60. The profit that firm A is going to enjoy is 1,800. How have I calculated this profit? I know that the profit is equal to is total revenue, which is price times quantity, to 60 times 30 will give me 1,800. Similarly, firm B is producing the other 30 units. The market price is 60, because collectively you see that 60 units are being produced. So at 60, the market price is set at 60. The profit that firm B is going to enjoy is 1,800. Now I'm agreeing to this fact that this is the best outcome. Even if A and B, they are involved in aggressive competition, this outcome is mutually beneficial to both the parties. But the problem is that this cannot be considered as equilibrium. Why? Because both the parties have an incentive to cheat. You know, firm A doesn't know what's happening in the mind of firm B. So firm A doesn't know how firm B is going to operate. Similarly, firm B is not too confident about how firm A is going to act. So if A and B have this, an implicit agreement between them, and by implicit I mean, I basically want to emphasize the fact that cartels or collusion, they are illegal. So if A and B are involved, have made a cartel, they're cooperating with one another, they don't have a legal cover. So if firm A reneges, or if firm A deflects on the agreement, firm B can do nothing about it. Similarly, if firm B deflects on the agreement, firm A can do nothing about it. So there's no formal binding that both A and B will continue to produce 30 and 30 units. At any time, these two firms can deflect, and the other party can be can just stand and do nothing about it. So although this is the best outcome for both the parties, but I'm trying to make a point here that both the parties have an incentive to cheat. Let's see how that works. In the second step, what I've written over here is that let's assume that firm A cheats and increases its production. firm B is naive and it continues to produce 30 units as per agreement. So firm A deflects on the agreement, it increases its production to 40 units. Firm B continues with 30 units. You can see that now the total market production is 70 units. Now going back to the table, you can see that when the market quantity is 70, the market price is going to fall to 50, right? So you can now calculate the profit that firm A is now going to earn. Firm A's profit increases to 2,000, but notice that firm B's profit, it decreases to 1,500. So firm A is a winner here. By cheating on this agreement, firm A has actually made a gain of $200. So it has every incentive to do that. It has every incentive to cheat and increase its profit to $2,000. It's important to realize here that here firm A is acting selfish. So it knows, if it's confident that firm B is going to be true to the agreement and it will continue to produce 30 units, firm A will cheat and it will increase its production and as a result increase its profit. Now you need to realize that firm B cannot be that stupid. If firm A can think that way, firm B can think exactly in the same manner. So firm B, in the next step, you notice that what I've written is that firm B retaliates and it also increases its production. Yeah, so if firm A can do this, firm B can also think in the same manner and increase its production. So let's assume that given that firm A has increased its production to 40, firm B is not going to sit and do nothing. It will also increase its production to 40. Now what incentive does this have for firm B? You can see that when it does it, the total market price it falls to 40. Coming back to the table, you can see that now the market production is 80. So since the market production is 80, the market price falls to 40. So when this happens, you can work it out that firm B increases its profit to $1,600. So firm B will definitely take this step in order to better its position. You know, previously it was making a profit which was equal to $1,500. By increasing its production, it can actually increase its profit to $1,600. So as a result, you can see firm A's profit, it falls to $1,600. Now let's again take our attention back to firm A. Now let's assume that firm A retaliates and it further increases production. So firm A increases production to 50, hoping that this way it might further increase its profit. But you can see that if firm A increases its production to 40 and firm B continues with 40 units, firm A will actually decrease its profits to 1,500, and similarly firm B's profits are also going to fall to 1,500. There's a deliberate reason why I have highlighted the last row in red, and I've also added a cross sign here implying that neither firm A nor firm B is going to do that. In other words, the game is going to stop at this point here, where both A and B are producing 40 units. Both are earning a profit of 1,600. Neither of the two firms will have any incentive to increase their production further, because if they do that, they're going to do harm to themselves. So why would they do that? Why would firm A increase its production to 50? Why would firm B retaliate and increase its production further? That is going to be disastrous for both the firms. So the game is going to end at this point here, where both are producing 40 units. That is, in the market, 80 units of output is being produced. So if I just rub these extra lines, and I can just show you that this is going to be the oligopoly outcome when A and B are involved in aggressive competition. So just compare this with the perfectly competitive outcome, and then let's compare it with the monopoly outcome, or the outcome when A and B, they act as a cartel. So a perfectly competitive outcome, we identify that outcome to be this one. The monopoly outcome was identified to be this one, where 60 units of output is being produced. So what do you notice? You notice that oligopoly outcome is going to be somewhere in between the perfectly competitive outcome and the monopoly outcome. So in the case of oligopoly, the price of the product is going to be less. So the price of the product is going to be more than what a perfectly competitive market is going to charge, but it's less than what a monopoly is going to charge. If you talk about quantity, an oligopoly outcome, this quantity is actually less than what a perfectly competitive market is going to produce, but it's going to be greater than what a monopoly is going to produce. So from a consumer point of view, perfect competition is the best, but the second best is going to be oligopoly, and the least liked from the consumer's perspective would be monopoly or oligopoly when it acts as a cartel. Okay, so this example basically illustrates how pricing and output decision is made in an oligopoly. In the next part, we're going to discuss another example which is slightly complicated than this, but you would see that we're going to arrive using the same reasoning. We can very well figure out what is going to be the oligopoly outcome in the case of when the firms cooperate with one another versus when they are involved in aggressive competition.